The entrepreneur's gift, in a way, is to see the future and create it and create the future before others can see the possibility. It's an advantage if people don't understand, because that means you're able to create without a lot of competition. When it's obvious, it's too late.
John, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being a guest again.
Thanks for inviting me back, Chase. I guess we did good enough to get a repeat invitation.
That's right. You crossed the threshold. No, prior to recording, we were just referencing our earlier show, and it was very popular, and that's for good reason. You have accomplished a lot. There's much to discuss, but for the handful of people who are new to you and or your work, I don't think anybody on the call is not going to know Whole Foods unless there may be a listener from overseas. But I'm wondering if you can just orient us a little bit about who you are and your journey so that we can begin anew with today's show.
My name is John Mackey, and co-founded Whole Foods Market back when I was 24. My girlfriend Renee, who co-founded it with me, was 20. And it was called Safer Way initially. And we had a house. We was in an old Victorian house, and it was a vegetarian store. Renee and I were both vegetarians. And we had a store on the first floor of this 3-story house. And we had a cafe on the second floor. And we had an office, which also served as our bedroom, because we moved into the store to save money. We were living in a co-op before then, and we did Safer Way for a couple of years, and then we decided we were too small, and we needed, not that we were that successful, but we just were in a competitive disadvantage. Relocated to a much bigger location, and merged with another small natural food store, a friendly competitor, we'll say, and we changed the name to Whole Foods Market. And that store just took off. It was no longer vegetarian. We served things with, we served alcohol, we served caffeine, we had some sugar, white flour. We were not as pure as we were at Safer Way, and that seemed to hit the sweet spot. Still a natural food store featuring natural and organic products. That store took off. It became became the highest volume natural food store in the United States in about 6 months of opening. And we had a flood, and 9 months after we opened up, that put 8 feet of water in our store, almost killed us, but we survived it. And then we came back, and that led to wanting to open up a second store so we wouldn't have all of our eggs in a basket that could float down the river. Second store started slow, but became successful. And then I guess the next big thing was we got to about 5 stores, and we raised venture capital money. And at a time when venture capital money was rare. It's not like the industry is today. And we were doing about $40 million a year in sales and making about $1 million in profits. And we were seen as this hippie grocery store. It was very hard to get the VCs were older, and they just couldn't understand what we were doing. It just seemed like it was just hippie food for hippies, and how big a market could that be? But we needed to raise money because we wanted to open up in Northern California. So we were able to raise $4.5 million. We sold a third of the company, 34% of the company, for that $4.5 million. Wow. And show you how valuations have changed. But that money got us to open in Palo Alto. We were hugely successful there. And then we did Berkeley, and then Mill Valley, and then San Francisco. And we continued to expand in Texas. And we were kind of off to the races. We did our initial public offering, our IPO, in 1992. And not only did we raised about $20 million in capital, but we raised about $28 million in capital, but we also got a currency. Now we had our own stock that was liquid that we could use. And we began to acquire some of our friends that we knew in the industry. Mrs. Gooch's in LA, Bread and Circus in Boston, Fresh Fields in Washington and Chicago, Unicorn Village in Florida, Wellspring Grocery in North Carolina. These created new platforms for us that enabled us to expand geographically. And then we just, pretty much every store we ever opened, and for the first 25 years, was successful. So we just kept growing. It was just an amazing ride. And part of the great thing we did with the acquisitions was not just getting territory, but we got talent. We got a lot of intellectual capital that came into Whole Foods, and we became kind of we consolidated an industry to a certain extent. The natural food supermarket industry consolidated under Whole Foods, and that enabled us to grow, and we began to compete more strongly with conventional supermarkets who really didn't pay much attention to us for the first. The supermarkets did not pay attention to us until we opened in Manhattan, particularly our store in Columbus Circle, which was a huge success, being the highest volume store in the company and probably the highest volume grocery store in New York. And it was in New York City. It was tremendously successful. Then the media discovered us because we were in New York. And as they publicized us, we were the good guys early on before we got too successful, and then they began to think we were evil. So yeah, that's what my book is about. It's kind of telling the story, the whole story of Whole Foods, kind of my own spiritual journey, my own awakenings, my own growth as a leader. I think I'm very candid in the book. I recount my failures, my mistakes, my immaturity, my some stupid things I did, but also how I learned from it and grew. And it's written kind of like it's kind of written like a novel, because it
It
flows
feels
like
very, yeah, it feels very novel. Yes.
because we have dialogue, we recapture dialogue, and the book was really was hard. It took us 3 years to work to get the book written, but I kind of got to relive about 45 years of my life, because I had to rethink every single year and all the important things. And then also we had about 25 or 30 people that got interviewed for the book, and they remembered things I'd forgotten, which when I read what they said, it was like, whoa, okay. Then that got me stimulated back in the memory, and I recounted things that I'd forgotten. So the whole thing was kind of fun. And I think it's the best book I've written, and probably the last book I'll ever write, but you never know. And so it gets published pub date is May 21st.
Yeah, we're gonna drop our conversation today, timed with your pub date. We'd
Thank
love
you.
to be in service of authors like yourself. Let's dig into that story, because again, there are a number of different vectors that I feel like will resonate with your audience, and things that we're personally curious. I was very curious about. Now, uh, specifically, I feel like you were well timed, and I like to understand. I like to try and understand the zeitgeist of the moment. You're talking about
Mhm.
IPO in the '90s. And I think that's very hard. It's very hard for me to identify and understand venture capital. Essentially, they tend to over-index on technology stocks because of the large rates of returns that are possible when you're, dealing with goods that are digitally available. So there's this, sort of the margin is extremely high relative to grocery stores. So there's a little bit of a zeitgeist and a time that I'm trying to understand, and I'm hoping we can start out there, which is culturally you were at the early end of the idea of a Whole Foods, or you talked about the sort of that is a healthy oriented market. Do you feel like that you and your frenemies that you had acquired, or people that were in the same food movement as you, do you feel like you were in part of the reason that this culturally caught on, or were you riding a wave that was happening without you and you had winds at your back, or what was it, some sort of combination there? And I'm always curious about this, and I'm hoping you can share with me your POV.
Well, first of all, that's a great question. And of course, because we can't do a controlled experiment, we can't know for sure.
Yeah.
And I believe it was both. You can have the world's best idea, but if your timing's not good, the idea will never catch on. Simultaneously, if you don't have good ideas, then it's kind of like the surfing is a good metaphor. We
Yeah.
did catch a wave, and we rode that wave a long time. But where the surfing metaphor breaks down is we also helped create that wave. Sometimes people don't. I remember Steve Jobs talking about he didn't do any market research before he launched the iPod, because what would the market research tell him? They tell him they need a CD that holds 30 songs instead of 12 songs, and it wouldn't say, well, we'd like something we can carry around in our hand that has 5,000 songs on it, or our whole music library on it. That wouldn't have come up in the market research. And people didn't know they wanted what Whole Foods was selling until we created it. And then I remember throughout the first 20 years of our business, when people would come into our stores for the first time, and you'd look at their faces and they would be like, wow, I've never been in a place like this before. You have to understand how different Whole Foods Market was from what was available in conventional supermarkets back in the 80s and 90s. It was the supermarkets were very sterile. They were mostly just selling processed foods, their perishable foods, their produce, their meat, their seafood. They didn't sell seafood for the most part. It was just kind of crummy because where America was, the America I grew up in, what my parents believed in, they were so thrilled about processed foods. Why? Because it made their lives easier. They were convenient. They didn't have to cook. They didn't have to work. They could open a can of macaroni and cheese and the kids were fed, or throw a frozen Swanson's dinner in and dinner is taken care of. And so particularly I'd have to say my mother loved that. And so when my generation, sort of this counterculture arose in the 60s and 70s, the hippie time, I identified as a hippie, I grew my hair long and had countercultural values. When that all came along, it shocked our parents. It was like, well, what do you mean you're opening up a grocery store that sells all this fresh food? Nobody eats that way anymore. And that was the biggest challenge that we had in the early days was people were so skeptical. The people that were in power, and including the venture capitalists that we're trying to raise money from, they didn't understand. They didn't understand what we were trying to do. They just thought it was this, as one guy said, as a venture capitalist turned me down, told me, he sat me down and wanted to tell me why he was rejecting us, which I was like, it's like asking a girl on a date and she says, I don't want to go out with you, but here's why I don't want to go out with you. And it's like, I'd rather not know.
No.
But he said, you guys are just a bunch of hippies and you're just selling. I toured your stores. That's just hippie shopping there. It's just not a very big market, John. And I just don't think it's a big market. People don't eat that way. And I said, well, I think people are starting to eat this way. It's going to be a bigger market. But he couldn't see that. And he said, well, if I'm wrong and it becomes a bigger market, the supermarkets will wipe you out. They'll just copy what you're doing and they'll have scale and you won't be able to compete. And that was kind of the wall of skepticism that we had to get through for so long. And when we went to talk to the venture capital guys back in 1988, I remember we went out to Silicon Valley, and I remember the regional investor banker that had set up the meetings. I said, well, all these meetings are on this one road, this something called Sand Hill Road. Are all the venture capitalists like together? And he said, yes, they are. This is like the Wall Street of the tech industry, which you have to understand back in the 80s, the tech industry, Apple was not a huge corporation back then. IBM was, but they weren't based in Silicon Valley. And the venture capital business kind of grew as the tech business grew, but it was not a big deal really back in the 80s. But pretty much every one of them turned us down. We found one in the Silicon Valley interested called Oak Investments, but they just put us in touch with the guy doing the retail part of their business who lived in Minneapolis, and he loved our stores, so they did make an investment. The other two were in Texas, in Houston, and they could just see we had a store in Houston that at that point was our highest volume store in the company, and they could just walk down there and see, oh my God, this place is packed. There's something to this natural food thing, even if they didn't have that lifestyle themselves. They could see a good opportunity when it was staring them in the face. Anyhow, the zeitgeist was that a lot of skepticism. It was a processed food world. The supermarkets themselves were obsessed with Walmart. And that created a great opportunity for Whole Foods Market because they kept making their stores, they tried to keep cutting costs to be more price competitive with Walmart. So their stores got uglier and uglier and more sterile. And while their prices were dropping, a lot of, we'll call them conventional middle-class women didn't like going into their stores anymore. And they liked coming into Whole Foods. They didn't understand what we were doing, but they knew our stores were beautiful and our produce was very fresh. And even though these people had tattoos and piercings and colored hair, they still were very nice to them because people at Whole Foods were very service oriented. So we slowly began to break out of just the hippies and we began to attract middle to upper middle class women in particular initially. And so I'll stop there.
Now, do you feel like was that intentional? You know, there's so much now. I'll just keep harkening back to the venture capital world. Now it's just identify your ideal customer, get your CAC, your cost of customer acquisition, and your lifetime value at a good place. So you know,
Right.
it's reasonably sophisticated and it's very customer focused, and it sounds like you may have been aware of some of that, but it sounds almost like alchemy rather than science. But you tell me how it really was.
It was alchemy. I mean, we were not, none of us had a business background. We were, I always say that I never took any business classes. I mean, when we started Saferway, I had just a few, my resume read like busboy, dishwasher, boys camp counselor, CEO Whole Foods Market. And Renee's, she was only 19 or 20 when we started it, and hers read Domino's delivery person. We put her in charge of the cafe because she had more experience there. But here's the thing, we were fast learners.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get passionate about something, like I got so passionate about healthy eating and about retail and business, my dad was overjoyed. My dad, who was my mentor in the business, he'd been an accounting professor at Rice University, and then he went into started working for some of his clients, ended up being a CEO of a hospital management company before he retired. So he took me under his wing, and I never, the first 16 years, I really didn't make any big decisions that I hadn't checked out with him. And then I just also read. I got more than an MBA, and just I read hundreds of business books. I've always been a passionate reader. And when you're interested in something, you absorb information and knowledge so much faster, and you retain it so much better than if you're not passionate about it. So work during the day, read at night, working really long days, but having a lot of fun though. Renee and I were having a blast. It was great fun.
I like that framing of both your personal approach to it and sort of the zeitgeist or the spirit of the times. And I feel like it came through in the book, and I can hear it in this, in your storytelling, is that there's the piece of you that people did not understand what you're doing. And we're talking specifically about venture capital folks, but even a couple different times you mentioned yeah, they might not have understood what we're doing, but the stores were cleaner or nicer or whatever. And so there's this, Jeff Bezos, and there's a Bezos chapter in your world that we'll get to, but he famously said, entrepreneurs, one of the best strengths you can have is a willingness to be misunderstood for long periods of time, where people do not understand what you're doing, and yet you are still doing it, almost in the face of these venture capital people, for example, that are going to tell you, either maybe it's friends or career counselors or your parents or whatever, or it's venture capitalists who are telling you that it's not going to work and you don't understand the market. And right now I'm imagining there's a bunch of people who are listening and watching who are saying, that's me. I've got that idea and no one gets it. Just go ahead and tell me some stories, or help me understand how you think about that relative to, what you wrote in the book and what I'm pitching here.
Well, a couple of things. It's an advantage if people don't understand, because that means you're able to create without a lot of competition. When it's obvious, it's too late. The entrepreneur's gift, in a way, is to see the future and create it, and create the future before others can see the possibility. And then in retrospect, it's obvious. Let's take the first time I took an Uber ride. I don't know how long ago that was, 15 years ago, something like that. It was like I got the app and I got in the car and I thought, shit, why didn't I think of this? It's so obvious this is a good idea. Taxi cabs were such a nightmare. You could never get one, and they were expensive, and you couldn't pay with your phone. And so it was like, I should have thought of Uber myself, right? So the good ideas, people are blind to them until they see it. And then it becomes, hey, I was a skeptic about a Tesla until I drove one. I didn't think I needed an iPhone until I used one. And then it was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I'm going to have to get one of these. So I do think that's part of what entrepreneurs do, is they see things and create things that people didn't know they needed it until they see it. The first 20 years or so, people come into Whole Foods Market and they would be astonished. It was like, wow, this is amazing. How come no one's done this before? And it's like, that's the entrepreneur's job. There's a world of skepticism, and the entrepreneur has to be able to resist that. And I had all the people that told me it was going to fail, and there were so many of them. Every time they tell me that, I saw something they didn't see, and I said, I'm going to prove you wrong. You're wrong. I see something you don't see, and I'll show you. I'll prove it to you. And so I used all that skepticism. I'm very inner-directed, I suppose. That may be a trait of many entrepreneurs. They were just wrong. I knew they were, and I'd prove it. And it'd make me more determined to prove it, that I was right and they were wrong, because I could see something they couldn't see. They were blind to it.
There's something simultaneously scary and beautiful about that. That there's motivation there. There is I guess there's some stubborn piece of many entrepreneurs, like the part of you, I could just hear it in your voice. I almost felt like I was transported back. You're like, I'll show you. There's something that is do you feel like that is a learned trait? Or is that some, piece of DNA that you were born with, that stubborn, I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to prove you wrong? Because right now, again, there's people who have all sorts of different orientations toward that value, if you will. And I'm hoping that you can teach us something. Is this a natural state? Was it natural for you? Is it natural for everyone? How should we think about it?
It's a good question, but I can't ultimately answer that, really. I mean, because as far as I can remember, I sort of had that trait. So was I born with it? Did my parents teach me that when I was a little boy, 4 years old? And, they'd say, hey, when you get knocked down, get back up again. Don't quit. Quitters never win. So entrepreneurs need to be resilient, and they need to have thick skins. It's not a smooth path all the time. You get stormy seas out there, and sometimes you lose control of the boat. I'm sticking with a boat metaphor right now. And you have to be able to trim your sails and get the boat on track and get to calmer waters. But there's hard times. And if you're easily discouraged, well, the entrepreneur life is not for you. You have to almost see a setback as, oh my gosh, what a learning opportunity this is. And the whole point is, not to make the same mistake twice. It's certainly not 3 times. Sometimes it takes us a little while longer to learn something, but I'm not easily discouraged. And once I decide I want to do something, I just sort of focus. You have to have an intense focus and keep working on it until you make it successful. Even that means adapting and changing. I want to say that, like I said, our first store, Saferway, was vegetarian store. It wasn't until, it wasn't very successful, but when we started selling meat and alcohol and coffee and beer and wine, then the customers told us they wanted those things. And when we did, the business really took off while maintaining our higher purpose, our mission, and our quality standards. So you have to be adaptable. You have to be resilient. Those can be learned. And the earlier you learn it in life, probably the more successful you'll be. But it's never too late. It's never too late to begin. You can get better at anything by practicing it. And I'm a different person today than I was 10 years ago because I practiced a lot of new skills and got better at it. I kind of think you should be learning and getting better all your entire life. That's kind of what it's about. Life's for learning and growing.
My last company was an online learning platform. So you're speaking to the choir here. We got a whole posse of lifelong learners listening and watching to this show.
I may be speaking to the preacher then.
That's right. Oh, I'll take that. I'll take that all day. Well, one of the things that you said there, I'm just going to fast forward to a question I was saving for later in the show, but I feel like it's timely now. And that is, you adapted. And at some point, I'm interested in understanding the line, or if there is one, between the adaptability of a creative or an entrepreneur and something that sort of flies in the face of your values. Because at one point, having values is one of the reasons that people choose to shop at your place versus a empty, faceless, nameless place. And you highlighted that you could argue that a clean and future forward store is one of the things that we want to represent. It's our values, it's our future, whatever. And so
I get it. I got the metaphor for you.
yeah, people pick up on this. And how did you manage that, having been at a vegetarian store that aligned with your values? And then was this a refutation of your values, or help us understand the sort of tension there?
Think of it as a dance.
Okay.
Or a conversation. It's not that you abandon your values. It's not that you don't ever lead. It's not that you're just responding to the marketplace, but you're in a dialogue with the marketplace. You're having a conversation, or you're dancing with the marketplace, and you're guiding it as well. The world changed because Whole Foods did things that changed the world. And so we asserted our values, but then again, it's like a relationship. You get, or let's use a marriage metaphor. If you just always expect to get your way in a marriage, it's not going to last. I can tell you that much. And you have to be willing to listen to your partner, and you have to be willing to change and adapt. But on the other hand, if you just surrender who you are, that's not going to be a good marriage either. And that relationship won't last because your partner's not going to respect you. So I think it's this relationship, it's this dance, and you're in this dance with the marketplace. You're teaching the marketplace, and it's teaching you. You're evolving the marketplace, and it's evolving you. So ultimately, I know you have to create value for other people. That's the secret to business, creating value for other people. But what kind of value you're creating, how you're delivering that value, how that value may evolve over time, it's not necessarily cut into stone. There's a flexibility to it. That's why I call it like a dance, because
I love that. Yeah, it's a beautiful metaphor.
You have to be adaptable while you have to still be who you are. So when you ask how malleable are your values, well, if they're totally malleable, you don't have any values. And if you're totally rigid in your values, then you're kind of a fanatic, and the market may reject you. And so there's no simple answer. You have to negotiate the dance yourself. And guess what? You're creating new steps all the time, and your partner is responding to those new steps. And then they may be showing you things that you weren't seeing before. So if you view it as a dance or a game that's fun, you're exploring, you're on an adventure, and you're learning things. If you're out hitchhiking around Europe, guess what? You're going to meet new people, and you're going to learn new things, and you'll be a different person when you come back, but you'll still be the same person, just a more evolved version of yourself. I think that's the way business kind of operates. Entrepreneurs will work that way.
Well, it's a beautiful metaphor, and I do feel like when I hear other people out there in the world talk about how hard the market is, I sense just through the conversation usually some underlying very strong sense of rigidity. The market, there is a world where you can do the thing that you want to do and participate in the market, and that overlap, right? That's what you're looking for. And there is, even if you believe as an entrepreneur that you're doing something right now, it's your job to see around the corner, that the market might not be there yet, but that it soon will be, much like every great entrepreneur. Anyone who's created a multi-billion-dollar brand knows this. If you're not actually ahead and leading, it's very, very difficult to succeed, or to at least be a category winner.
Yeah, it's hard to play catch. It's hard to play catch up, and
it really
need to have massive amount of resources to play catch up. On the other hand, I want to go back to this idea of value creation.
Great,
because when you said that, well, people think the market's too tough, they're thinking about it. I don't think they're thinking about it the right way. Be thinking about the question you always need to be asking yourself is, how can we create more value? What is the market? What can we give the market? Not just what it thinks it needs, but what it doesn't even know it needs yet. But once you show it to them, they're going to want that. I don't want to talk about my new business yet, Love.Life, but that's part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to create these one-stop medical wellness centers that people are going to think, why didn't this exist before? I didn't even know I needed this. And now it seems so obvious. I think every good new business idea is thinking always, what's the unmet market need? What is the uncreated values that we can give to customers? that will help us to be successful, but also mostly is just going to help them have a better life. How can we create more value? And that never stops. You have to ask that question all the time, maybe every day. How can we create more value? What are we missing out here? What are we not seeing? And by the way, part of the reason you're in dialogue with the customer's telling you, here's what you're not seeing because this is what I want. Okay, listen to me, listen to me. And if you listen and then you put that and you adapt to what they're telling you and you still have your own creative impulses to it, then you're on that value creation track. People that say the market's tough, they're really saying is I can't think of any value creation that I can deliver to people that is unique or different or at an more affordable price, or that's kind of a cop out. It's an excuse for not failing to realize that you need to create more value and you haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Very well articulated. And I do think that that is almost a condition of being a successful entrepreneur. Go back to your point about adaptability. Like there is this sort of obsession with creating value. And I don't know if most of the entrepreneurs I know don't talk about it in those direct terms, only because maybe they, haven't don't have the business school education, but there's that underlying desire to serve the needs of people that they're in a community and you can smell their problems, right? Like,
Right.
or you either have that problem yourself. I'm wondering, did Whole Foods or Safer Foods back then, were you filling an unmet need? Did you want that food and couldn't find it?
Pretty much. Yeah, it's exactly right. There was, I remember one of the awakening experiences I had. I went into this small co-op in Austin back in the early 70s, and I became a member of that co-op. And they had all this food, real food, like beans and brown rice and flour, whole wheat flour. And they were in these big bins. They were bulk bins. I'd never seen food like that. I said, wow, this is like real food. I want real food. I don't want just stuff in bottles and cans. This is real food. I could cook this. That was like an awakening moment for me. And that was like the beginning of my food awakening. And then when I moved into the vegetarian co-op, I wasn't a vegetarian when I moved in. That was a huge awakening because I was with all these people a little older than me, a little more experienced in vegetarianism and cooking and food as health and nutrition. And I just took to it. It was like, wow, this is so great. This is so cool.
As an awakening.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about that in the book, and
It's a good metaphor.
It is, and there are a couple different ones, right? There's philosophical awakenings, much like the food thing. There's ethical awakenings around animal welfare and sourcing of foods. I'm wondering if you can, were there some other awakenings? Maybe you go a little bit deeper first, a little bit deeper on the animal welfare or vegetarianism, and then follow that up with, was there any other sort of big awakenings that you feel like were core to your journey?
God, the whole book is almost, I could retitle that book Awakenings. I mean, I start out the book when I'm 22 years old and I'm coming down from a very large LSD trip where I experienced the ego death. That's how I start out the book. And that changed my life because I was knocked off the path my parents wanted for me. It was soon after that I no longer was trying to get a degree. I was reading books that I was interested in reading. I moved into the vegetarian co-op because I had this experience of, oh my God, the universe is not what I thought it was. It is so much more beautiful and awesome than I ever realized. And I'm part of it. I am with an ego death, you merge back into the one and you experience the oneness of all existence. It cannot really be described. It can only be experienced. And then words fail to express the magnificence of the experience. So that was a real game. I was awakening, a game changer for me. Breaking up with Renee was an awakening experience for me. It's like getting, with my wife that I've been with now for 34 years, Deborah, was a complete awakening experience because she was a far more conscious, awake person than I was. And I've been trying to catch up to her ever since.
I'm married to one of those people too, John. It's hard.
It,
Beautiful and easy at the side at one point, and very hard because
well,
they're so far ahead of us.
what I say is that, I'm such a self-willed guy that the universe played this trick on me. Is I'm incapable. I have authority. I'm an entrepreneur. I have authority issues. It's hard for me to take instructions from other people. So I could never take a guru on. So the universe, I married my guru. I mean,
we'll have to have a conversation separate from
we'll do
this
that
because
offline.
that is I have that same karma.
So the awakenings just continue all through the book. There are business awakenings, there's personal awakenings, there's spiritual awakenings. Because I'm trying to say that I grew in this 45-year period. I'm very frank and candid about a lot of the mistakes that I made, the times I tried to drive the Whole Foods bus off the cliff. I guess I'm proud that I did awake, I did learn, I did become a better leader and a better human being. One of the great things about being an entrepreneur is you have this opportunity to create, but also to experience failure and setbacks. And if you have an open mind and an open heart, you have this tremendous opportunity to grow as a human being because you're not playing it safe. Most people stop growing because they give into fear and they get trapped into their identity, and they're no longer open past a certain point to changing their values, changing their beliefs, meeting people that they might be a little bit uncomfortable with and getting to be friends with them. Life is this adventure, and most of us, it's a hero's journey, and everyone's called to a hero's journey, I'm convinced, but most people, mostly because of fear, don't answer the call or only partially answer it.
Can you articulate in a little more depth just one, perhaps your favorite story from the book, or otherwise, it doesn't have to be from the book, but about one of these moments where you were doing the wrong thing and you realized it and learned from it? You talked about almost driving Whole Foods off the cliff. There was a couple other references that I will just in your last 90 seconds, you inferred some things. And I'm wondering if you can share one of your favorites that it sounds like you're equally proud of recovering, right? It's not about avoiding mistakes necessarily as an entrepreneur. It's about recovering quickly. And what was one of the key ones that maybe had, led to some other further insights?
Well, I have described some already. So like Safer Way is a rigid vegetarian store that tried not to sell sugar, coffee, beer, wine, was too rigid. So that's an example if you're looking for an example. There are so many other ones where one of the questions that the journalists often ask me, because it's kind of a gotcha question, is do you have any regrets? Is there anything if you could go back and tell your younger self, something, give them some advice, what would you tell them? That's a trick question, because what they really want to do is get you to describe some massive mistake that you made, and that's the headline that you'll see in the article.
That's not our goal here, John.
I know it's not your goal, but I'm using an example because I generally have like 3 answers to that question. The first 2 kind of being jokes. The first answer is, if I'd gone back and told my 24-year-old self anything, he would have told me to get screwed, because he wouldn't listen to me. He says, "You don't know shit, old man." And he would never have listened. And secondly, if I'd gone back and told myself anything, I'd have said, "Do not get involved with her. You'll be miserable." So, but then the third answer, which is the wisest answer, is to say, I wouldn't tell my younger self anything, because if I'd avoided those mistakes, I wouldn't have become the person that I am today. And I like who I am today. I don't know what the path would have been if I hadn't had that failure, if I hadn't had that learning opportunity. I wouldn't have learned the lesson I needed to learn. And so it all worked out well for me. I'm a very happy man. I've been prosperous. Whole Foods is a company I'm very proud of. I'm doing wonderful things. I have a lot of friends. I've had a good life. And so you risk that good life if you go back and make changes that you don't exactly see how the ripples will play out, right? But I'm not trying to dodge your question, so I can give some examples like because the most important things we'll ever do in business, in my opinion, partly is getting your vision right and then being able to evolve it over time. But then you're building a team. The biggest mistakes I made were clearly promoting the wrong people from time to time. And I'm not going to tell you who those people were, but if you read in my book, some of them pop in. But those are also your biggest successes. If you hire really great people that share your values and complement your weaknesses. I mean, one of my great discoveries is, I suppose one of my superpowers is I'm a pretty self-aware guy. And that means I'm pretty aware of things I'm good at. And I'm also quite aware of things I'm not good at. Sometimes entrepreneurs that are successful, it goes to their heads and they start thinking they're some kind of genius and that everything they do, they have the Midas touch, and they don't give enough credit to luck, and they don't give enough credit to the other people on the team. Their egos sort of puff up and they think they're really special people. And I think one of my gifts in a way was recognizing I'm so bad at so many things. I've got to have somebody here that, for example, I'll give you an example. I'm not good at hiring people. And it's because that weakness comes out of a strength, which is I see people with rows. I see the good in people and I see their highest potential. And I think that person can be great. What I don't always see is the downsides. So I need people that are a little more skeptical to be in those interviews. Otherwise, I'd hire almost everybody I interviewed, and I wouldn't see that that's not going to work out. So once I learned that about myself, I started to defer to my team on important hiring decisions, because I realized, I've been wrong too many times and they've been right. So I'm going to listen to them. And I'd say that was a huge learning for me, and it resulted in Whole Foods becoming a much better company. I stopped making bad hiring decisions because I stopped primarily making them without getting a lot of advice from people that I loved and respected on the team.
Probably a hint from the death of the ego experience, right? You start to realize that you are not the center of the universe, and trusting other folks. And I think go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
There's a paradox there, because the ego is not the center of the universe, but the essence of what we are is, because we are a manifestation of that oneness.
Sure.
And so, but it's not that little separate ego that thinks it's at the center of the universe, when it's more like a little tiny drop of water in a vast ocean. And even that doesn't do justice to it. I just thought of a really good example, and then I got off thinking about this other thing, and maybe it'll come back to me. Rephrase the question you're trying to get me to answer.
Oh, I feel like you've articulated really clearly everything we were trying to get to. What we were just speaking about is the things that people might not know about.
I just remembered.
Okay, great.
So probably the biggest mistake I ever made at Whole Foods Market was back in 2008 through 2010. Remember, we coming off that financial crisis where our Whole Foods Market stock dropped 90% in less than a year. We were trading at 3 times our cash flow. Could have bought our company and paid for it with our own cash flow in just 3 years. So we were terrified we're going to be taken over. And we took some private equity money in to give us some liquidity and some more voting control. But then we came roaring out of that recession, and our sales comps went into double digits, started growing like crazy, and our stock price exploded. That was the opportunity we had, the best opportunity we ever had. We knew we needed to lower our prices. We knew that we had getting more and more competition. They were beginning to undercut us in price. The supermarkets were catching on to natural and organic foods. Trader Joe's was always a formidable competitor. Sprouts had been born. This was our chance to really reduce prices. Instead, because we were doing so well and our stock kept going up, we just missed the opportunity. We missed the window. And I saw our gross profits going up, and I asked the team, I said, how come our gross profits are getting better? Are we raising prices? And the answer that I got back was, no, we're not raising prices. We're getting it because we have less spoilage, because our sales are higher, and less shrink. And we're getting it on the buy side. We're buying better. That turned out not to be true. But I believed it because I wanted to believe it. Never underestimate the power of confirmation bias. I wanted to believe that. And so I didn't go check firsthand. And so we missed this window of opportunity. We could have never had the whole paycheck moniker if we had stopped right then and there and said, instead of letting our stock price go crazy, let's invest this in lower prices. I believe if we had done that, I'd probably still be the CEO of Whole Foods Market. We'd probably still be independent today. So that was my single biggest mistake I believe I made. And it was a team mistake. It was a collective mistake.
Yeah.
But as the CEO, I didn't check, and I really shouldn't have just believed what I was told. I should have gotten the evidence.
Interesting. I feel that opened a crack for me to try and understand a little bit better about you ultimately being acquired by Amazon. Do you feel in some ways was that a downstream effect from that experience that you just shared? And
Correct.
or yeah, maybe you can articulate that in your words, not mine. But was that a direct cause and effect, or was there some other? Was it just a correlation?
No, I think there is a direct relationship, but there are lots of other pieces besides it didn't go right to there. There were many factors, and people always, that's the question I get asked the most today is, do you regret selling to Amazon? And the truthful answer is, I regret the circumstances that made the Amazon solution our best alternative. It was the best alternative. If I had to go back into the same circumstances that I found myself in 2017, I'd made the same decision. And in many ways, the Amazon merger has been a great thing for Whole Foods Market because they did let us drop our prices. It was very difficult to do that. If you're a public company, if you're trying to lower your prices, you're selling something for $1 and you drop it to 90 cents. Well, in the long run, that's going to be a good thing because people are going to say, wow, it used to be $1. I get it for 90 cents. I'm going to buy more of them. In the short run, you just lowered your sales 10%. And you just lowered your comps tremendously, probably negatively, and your profitability at the same time. So you have to be able to have the time to lower prices. If you're public, you always don't have the time because the markets are too impatient. So that's why we had that opportunity when the stock was going up to go ahead and lower prices into it. So what ended up happening was that we got a activist investor. I go into some detail in the book in it. So I'm just giving the highlights of this. We have activist investors take positions in the business. Jana Partners, the primary one, but there were others as well. And we met with them and they just said, we're going to take over Whole Foods Market. We're going to replace your board. We're going to fire you and your management. And we are going to sell this company to the highest bidder because you guys are, it's the business. You don't know how to run this business. And they were just looking for a quick profit. They bought, and then the profit stock, when people found out Jana Partners owned it, the stock started to go up because people started to anticipate a sale at a premium to take it over. And so we had this big decision to make. Well, are we going to fight Jana? That was, of course, the first alternative. Or there are other potential buyers that out there that we might like to sell to instead of just being put up to the highest bidder, which might mean a supermarket company that did not share our values might get control of our company, like a Kroger or Albertsons or someone like that. Not that those are bad companies; they just wouldn't
Different
be a good
values.
fit. Wouldn't be a good fit for Whole Foods. So we contacted Warren Buffett, for example, and he kind of laughed about it and said, it wouldn't be a good fit. I own Dairy Queen. So, and there were people that wanted to take us private, but going private is a huge risk for a company because the private equity firms only put a little bit of money in. And mostly they borrow the money from investment banking firms to get control of the business. And then they borrow long-term financing on the company's balance sheet, meaning Whole Foods is on the hook for the debt. And pretty much all of your earnings, your cash flow is going to service that debt. So if the business turned down for any reason, you're risking bankruptcy and complete failure. So the going private alternative was a huge risk. And so we're girding up to fight Jana, and I wasn't sure we could win that fight. I really thought we could hold them off for a while, but I wasn't sure that we had enough time to make the changes that we needed to make. And then I just woke up one morning and I thought to myself, what about Amazon? And it was just like a flash. I'd met Jeff Bezos the year before, and I really like Jeff. He's clearly one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time, particularly this era. Brilliant man. So he was kind of one of my heroes. And I met him at a Microsoft CEO Summit, and we kind of hit it off. We talked about scuba diving, and Jeff's into science fiction and fantasy. We talked about books. And so I thought, I like this guy. And then, but I didn't know how to get in touch with him. He said, let's get together and talk about Whole Foods. And I never heard from him. So then we get Jana active as partners. And then I wake up that morning thinking about Amazon, because I knew they were trying to get more into the grocery business with Amazon Fresh. Maybe they'd be interested in Whole Foods. And we contacted him, and we had a meeting set up just a few days later. We met with him and had the most amazing conversation. I wish I could have recorded that conversation, because, you know, like when you fall in love, you have the conversation at some point that you stay up all night talking. And it's like you found your soulmate, you found your partner, and you know she's the one or he's the one. Well, that happened to us in our first conversation. We talked for 2 to 3 hours, and our team went away thinking, man, those guys are so smart. We talked about all the ways we could work together and how we could have a good partnership. And then we retreated to a restaurant. We're out of Seattle. The whole conversation is detailed in the book. It's kind of interesting because we went to Jeff's boathouse.
I know all those spots too. So I'm a Seattle guy, so it was really interesting. Extra.
We were searched, for guns and that kind of thing. So our car was examined to make sure we didn't have any bombs in it or whatever. Anyhow, we went and retreated, and we're talking about what a great partnership this could be. And then I looked at the group and I said, do you think they liked us too? Like you've had that first date and you're wondering, you like the girl a lot, but does she like you? And but they did. And we got a call from them a couple of days later. And then it was 6 weeks after that first meeting, we had signed a marriage contract, and it had to then be approved by the government, but that happened pretty quickly. And then we were married. And all in all, there's some regrets, but all in all, it was a very good thing for Whole Foods. And
it's a page turner in the book, by the way. It's a page turner, and that's the entrepreneur in me. And I think for those who are listening to you articulate this is whether you're into groceries or Whole Foods or sustainability, or whether you don't have to be into any of that to enjoy the story. It's very, very heartfelt and earnest page turner. And I think any conversation with you would be incomplete if we didn't talk a little bit about your spiritual journey, because it seems to have coincided very cohesively or in parallel. There's a lot of connective tissue rather, between your entrepreneurial journey and your journey as a human. You've talked about, just in our conversation, oneness, unity, connection, all so many of these principles. And yet it seems like there were some pretty substantial shifts.
It's all spiritual in the sense that from the very beginning, I've been following my heart, answering the call of the hero's journey. And that journey is a spiritual journey, ultimately, whether people are conscious of it or not, because where is that coming from that is guiding us to take that leap, to do the courageous act, to go and follow, our passions in life? I think that comes from within. And I think that is a spiritual reality. So in writing the book, I have these spiritual components from the beginning to the end of the book. And the first one is, I mentioned earlier in this interview that I had a powerful LSD trip when I was 22 years old that kind of changed my trajectory of my life, knocked me off the path my parents had set for me, which was to be a professional, to get, an advanced degree and become a doctor or a lawyer or some respectable businessman, not a grocer, for God's sake. My mother was embarrassed all the way up to her death about what her son had chosen in life. But that, when I was younger, getting out of high school, I became like a born again Christian for about 2 years. I got really into the evangelical side. I joined a group, and then I kind of found that a little bit too dogmatic and stultifying and a little bit rigid for me. And it also couldn't answer the problem of evil. The problem of evil being, if God's all powerful and all knowing and all loving, then why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? I didn't think there were good answers to that in any of the religious paths. So I drifted into kind of atheism for several years. I became an existentialist. I was studying philosophy. And I would think back now and I realized I was a seeker. I was seeking for transcendence. I was seeking for deeper purpose and meaning. And so I tried on the born again path and discovered that wasn't for me. And then psychedelics opened up this much bigger universe for me. I started studying Eastern religions and reading Alan Watts and started to learn how to meditate. I started meditating, transcendental meditation. And I just began to realize that, wow, there's a deeper spiritual reality out there that I hadn't been aware of before. And then in 1984, I did MDMA for the first time, ecstasy, Molly is it's now called, I think, and was still legal back then, believe it or not, 1984. And that just opened up to me the heart, the love, that love is the most, I've never doubted since that day that love, that's 40 years ago now, that love is the most important thing in life. The most important thing is love. No one's going to get to the end of their lives on their deathbed, be thinking they wish they'd worked harder, that they wish they'd created more, they'd made more money. It's going to be all about their relationships and the regrets they might have had. I wish I'd told her how I really felt, or my son never really knew how much I loved him, or you just don't want those type of regrets because love is why we are here. And I saw that clearly. I've never forgotten it, and I've gone deeper into it. That it's always about going deeper into love for me. How can I be more forgiving, less judging, more compassionate, kinder, more thoughtful? And hey, I'm still a work in progress. I'll be the first to admit it. But I do talk about that in the book. And then I got into Course in Miracles has been a self-taught, self-paced spiritual study that I've been doing for many years. My wife is very conscious, very awake person, and she's worked with me in very subtle ways. And I know towards the end of the book, as I was transitioning out of Whole Foods, when I made the decision to retire, it was back in 2022 that I decided I was going to retire. And I go into the reasons why I wanted to do that. I won't do that here. But I wanted to do a guided spiritual journey. I'd read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And I thought, I hadn't done any psychedelics in decades. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do a guided journey. And I did a lot of research, found a really good person that was highly recommended. And I did a 5-day retreat. And I forgot to mention that one of my spiritual techniques was breath work, which I started doing back in 1984. Found breath work, holotropic breath work, to be very powerful. For people that are afraid of psychedelics but want to have a transcendent experience, do breath work. You're in control. It's amazing how doing connected deep breathing for extended periods of time will give you a transcendent experience. You can connect to that deeper part of your being, connect to your own soul. And it's not psychedelic induced. So for 5 days, we did breath work and we did guided journeys with a combination of MDMA and psilocybin. And it was a very powerful, it was helping me transition out of retiring from Whole Foods. I was retiring from Whole Foods just a couple of months after that week. And I had some emotions because love is the essence of what we are, but it's often blocked. It's blocked by anger. It's blocked by judgment. It can be blocked by fear. It can be blocked by various negative emotions. And what began to surface for me in that experience was that I had some anger towards Amazon, which the way things kind of worked out. And I was able to let that go. I let go of my anger towards Amazon. I saw that it was all necessary. Everything that happened was appropriate. And then I also had some maybe regret that I didn't go down the path of fighting Jana. And then I realized, no, I could let that go too. That I made the right decision at that time. I can think back what I should have done in 2008, but in 2017, I made the right decision. And so I let that go. And then as I let these things go and I let go all these blocks, I got into this amazing space of for the first time in my life, I experienced unconditional love for myself. I felt unconditional love for the universe, all existence, and I felt unconditional love for God. And I just cried and cried and cried for a long, long time because there was so much energetic release coming out. So I did another guided journey last summer. So I've done 2 of those now. I don't know if I'll need to do any more because one of the things that the last breath work I was doing said, hey, we've already shown you what you need to know. You don't need to do these. What you need to do is practice stillness. Be still, because in the moment, love is in the moment. Stillness, stillness, stillness. I'm a wired guy, so stillness is not the easiest thing for me, but that's what's up. Practicing, going deeper into meditation, practicing more stillness. And I finished the book talking about the infinite game, because I think an infinite game, it's a great metaphor. If you think about a typical game like basketball or football, or it's a finite game because they have clear rules. There's winners, there's losers, and the game is over. You can start another game, but that game is over. An infinite game never ends. So an infinite game, business itself is an infinite game because players come and go, businesses, some succeed, some fail, they change. But it continues to go on. New businesses are created, new entrepreneurs pop up. So the game itself goes on and on and on. Capitalism is kind of an infinite game. Life itself, argue DNA replicating over and over and over again, is kind of an infinite game, or attempting to be an infinite game till the sun goes supernova, I guess. And I like that metaphor a lot because in creating Whole Foods, I want that to be an infinite game. I would like Whole Foods to live on decade after decade after decade. And now the new business of creating Love.Life, I want that to be an infinite game as well. That's going to outlive me and go on and help, I hope, over time, millions and millions of people be healthier and live longer. So the infinite game is a spiritual interpretation of existence. It goes into the deepest part of my own spiritual knowing, is that, I re-experienced the Big Bang. I mean, it's like there's the singularity, there's the one being that is in the singularity for an infinite amount of time, and then has sort of like the Big Bang, which is like a cosmic orgasm, and the multiverse explodes into existence. Expanding, the breathing out and all possibilities. We're creating, we're playing, we're having adventures. It's fun. And then we breathe it back in again, and we're back in the singularity. And that is the infinite game. It's been there forever. It always will be there. It's the way the universe works. That is what I experienced. I can't prove that to anybody, but that's my deepest sharing I can give to you. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful because we're all part of it. Our egos may disappear, but the essence of what we are is completely immortal and always will be. It'll always exist. We've always existed. We always will exist. It's the infinite game, and we're playing it.
It is a beautiful, just metaphor of the infinite game for life. And thank you for sharing so vulnerably your experiences there. I'm also a fellow TMer and have been for 10 years. I appreciate and find great value in the way that you have tied those elements together, elements of your life, business, and this concept of deeper spirituality, and the idea that these are all separate has never sat well with me. And I feel like you and your storytelling generally, and your book in particular, have done a beautiful job. Again, the book is The Whole Story: Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism. You realize how hard it is for me not to beg you to go into great detail about your new business. This is like podcast host faux pas 101, is to have you mention these new businesses and me let you off the hook. This is just because I'm going to have you back on the show to talk about that at another time. We're going to set the bait there and hope that our audience are very, very excited to hear from you. Is there anything you want to tell us besides the name, or shall we just entirely leave it at rest?
Well, the great news there is that we'll have a lot more to show. We open up our first holistic health center. First Love.Life is going to open in El Segundo in the LA area on July 9th. And then it's going to be big. It's in an old Best Buy, 45,000 square feet. Our next door neighbor right there in the same center with us is Whole Foods Market, one of their best stores in Southern California. So I didn't move too far away from it. And I figure a lot of the Whole Foods customers are going to like what Love.Life is. So in some ways, Love.Life is a continuation of my own higher purpose. Whole Foods' highest purpose is to nourish people on the planet. And Love.Life's going to be doing something very similar to that, just not just in food, but emotionally, spiritually. We will be doing meditation classes. We'll be doing yoga. We'll be doing Pilates. We'll have medical. It's a very big idea. And as I mentioned previously, the first 20 years or so when people went into Whole Foods Market, had never been there before. They were sort of blown away by what they saw because they'd never seen a store like that. I think Love.Life's going to be similar to that. People are going to go in and they're going to think, wow, this is a good idea. I didn't, why has no one done this before? Because you're combining it all together, right? I mean, why do people go see a doctor generally, Chase?
Because they're sick.
Yes. The doctor's job should be that you never get sick, because the doctor's working with you to optimize your health at the highest level possible. And we can do that now. We have the knowledge, we have the science, we have the wearables, we have the data collection. We can track people, we can create plans. And that's what the doctors are going to be doing at Love.Life. They're going to help people be the healthiest version of themselves, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. That's the big plan. That's the big vision.
That is a massive vision, and I can't wait to learn more and to participate. It sounds tasty. I'm all in. And until next time, though, when we're going to talk about that Love.Life, again, just a hat tip for the book, the whole story, fantastic, must read, and highly recommend from me. John, thank you so much for sharing, for being vulnerable, and anywhere else you'd steer our trusted community here to go learn more about this, or should we just focus on the book?
Yeah, well, we have a website.
Okay.
It's www.love.life. And we have a telehealth business, but the real unveiling will be on July 9th. So I'll build up some anticipation for that.
All right. We're all in. Thank you so much for your time. And for everybody out there in the world, hope you have an amazing day and you enjoyed this conversation. Do go pick up a copy of John's new book and stay tuned for Love.Life. Until next time, from John and myself, we bid you a great day.